important reading. As Shaykh al-Hadith Manzaki Rahmatullah alayh, he says, and all those people who are connected to him say, that if those people that do dhikr and have some sort of coming and going or familiarity with the Mashaykh al-Tasawwuf and the Khanqas, two kitabs, as Shaykh Rahmatullah alayhi used to always say that his murids, especially those that do dhikr, should read. One is Ikmal al-Shiyam and the other is Irshad al-Muluk. And the other thing that he used to also say was that wherever there's people, a few people gathered together, let one person read and the others listen. So just to fulfill that wasiyat of Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah alayhi that you see in many of his writings, especially in his letters, we get together in order to read this and inshallah bring some jaan into our suluk and tasawwuf. It's not about suluk and tasawwuf, isn't just about spinning the rosary beads or spinning the tasbeehs. It's also about bringing some sort of ahwal inside the heart and to give us some understanding. And this kitab provides that context, inshallah ta'ala. So carrying on with Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah alayhi, he first of all mentioned the biographies of Moulana Abdullah Sahib Gangohi Rahmatullah alayhi. Thereafter he went to explain the biography of Hazrat Moulana Khalil Ahmad Saharanpuri Rahmatullah alayhi, who translated the hikam originally into Urdu. And it's his Urdu that we will be covering. So he says, he talks about his life and he carries on and he says that during one of the trips to Hijaz, Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah alayhi was also with him. And he carries on, he says, those times were so unsafe and dangerous that some people would hazard the trip to Medina. So, this was approximately just around the First World War, just after the First World War. And Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah alayhi went for Hajj with Hazrat Saharanpuri. They went for Hajj, and then because the journey to Medina was quite difficult, not difficult in the sense that it was a journey by camel, but difficult and in the sense that there was a lot of bandits, the Bedouins would be attacking pilgrims, killing people, etc. So it was a very dangerous journey. So Hazrat Saharanpuri Rahmatullah alayhi said to them that only those people who've never been should go. So Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah alayhi writes that those times were so unsafe and dangerous that some people would hazard the trip to Medina before the Hajj. Very few would venture after Hajj. Neither lives nor people's property was safe. The government of Sharif Hussain. So this was the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had collapsed. And Sharif Hussain, I think he was the great-grandfather of King Abdullah of Jordan nowadays, he'd led the Arab revolt. And after the Arab revolt, there was a lot of turmoil, a lot of safety wasn't there at the time. So he said Sharif Hussain had no control beyond the four walls of Makkah. Killing and plundering were rampant, and people were only permitted to stay in Medina for 3 days. If anyone wished to stay more than 3 days, a daily fee of 1 guinea had to be paid in the Bedouin in charge of your caravan as long as he was in agreement with you staying. A few of us murids, with the blessings of Hazrat Saharanpuri, the grace and favor of Allah Almighty, finally reached Medina. And traveling initially along the coast and then in a clandestine fashion through the valleys of Mount Gai. And the story of this journey is indeed long and interesting. And then Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah mentions that one of the small manifestations of the many bounties and grace of Allah Almighty that's always been with this humble one was that instead of just 3 days in Medina, I was able to spend 40 days. This is truly an example of the bounties mentioned in the Quranic verse, and if you count the bounties of Allah, never will you be able to enumerate them. On reaching Medina, one of the camels in our caravan died due to exhaustion. Neither did the camel owner have sufficient funds to purchase another mount, nor did we possess enough money to advance the loan with which another camel could be purchased. Hazrat Saharanpuri Rahmatullah alayhi had calculated our expenses for a return journey. So they'd given him stipends and calculated that this much money you need for 3 days. So we were only given a small amount of money. The rest of our funds were left at Haji Ali Jan's shop in Makkah. Whenever the camel owner would ask us for a loan to enable him to purchase a camel, we'd in turn ask him for a loan to buy food, saying we had only made arrangements for 3 days. And as a result, the poor man, may Allah Most High reward him, would repeatedly ask to be pardoned for the delay in his shortcomings. When one of our associates would sometimes complain to the Amir of Medina, he too would apologize and instruct us to be patient and rebuke the Bedouin. So like this, they ended up spending 40 days whilst the camel was being procured for them. These are very unique and wonderful incidents. It's not my intention to write my autobiography here. These lines have been written without original intent. Anyway, after Hajj, we returned to India. We had the Saharanpuri and reached Saharanpur in 1920. Now the 7th Hajj was the journey which Hazrat Saharanpuri bid his final farewell to India. Hazrat Saharanpuri Rahmatullah alayhi spent his entire life teaching hadith. He was a Shaykh al-Hadith. He taught in Saharanpur for many years, special connection to Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one thing that was really he was very excited about was that towards the end of his life, he migrates to Madinah to Munawwara and passes away there. So this was the last Hajj. On the insistence of the Murids of Hyderabad, it is arranged for Hazrat Saharanpur to stay 1 week in Hyderabad. So from Saharanpur, he came south to the Deccan. He stayed in Hyderabad for a week. And the departure from Saharanpur for Hyderabad was on 16 Shawwal, 1925. It was agreed that I also accompany Moulana Saharanpuri as far as Hyderabad. However, after arriving at the station and precisely at the moment of departure, after taking up seats in the carriage, it was discovered that Moulana's main item of luggage, in which all his items of trust, money, etc. was left behind in Saharanpur. So I returned as the train departed and reached Hyderabad the next day with the luggage. After staying about a week in Hyderabad, Hazrat Saharanpuri left for Bombay, and according to plan, the rest of the group, together with his wife, left from Saharanpur directly for Bombay on 23rd of Shawwal. Moulana Saharanpuri rahmatullah alayhi then goes on to the dates. Anyway, he says from Bombay the ship sailed on the 20th of May and the ship docked on the 17th of Zulqa'dah at Kamaran. So Kamaran was an island off the coast of Yemen, and it was under the British, and they used it as a quarantine. They used to put people in quarantine there for a few days to make sure there's no illnesses. Then they'd let them go and carry on to Hijaz. And from there it sailed on the 18th, reaching Jeddah on the 21st. From Jeddah, the journey to Makkah was by camel, and the group reached Makkah on the 25th. Moulana Saharanpuri rented a house in a narrow street opposite Bab Ibrahim, and he stayed there with 4 of his attendants. On the 8th, we left for Mina. Hazrat Saharanpuri and his wife on one camel. Some of the other companions were nearby on other camels, and some of us, Khuddam, we walked on foot alongside his blessed camel. In Mina, we stayed in a tent of a Hajj caravan, a Mutawwif. One tent was for the ladies, and the other was for the men. And then likewise, we traveled from Mina to Arafat, then to Muzdalifah, Mina, Makkah, for the Tawaf Ziyarah. From Makkah, we returned to Mina and returned once more from Mina. So they completed the Hajj. And then thereafter, on the 22nd of Dhul Hijjah, the 2nd of July 1926, the process of Tabriz began. The Tabriz was a well-known practice associated with travel by camels in those days. Caravans would halt for the night about a mile or two outside Makkah to enable people to return to Makkah to bring any goods or persons left behind. So they travel out of Makkah, stay there for about one night, and then in case they've left anyone behind, anything needed to be gathered, and they'd carry on. Nowadays, in view of motor transport, people are no longer aware of this practice. A few camels would leave at a time and stop at a place called Jarwal. Now, Jarwal is, if you go to Makkah to Mukarramah, it's just about a few kilometers away from the Haram. So it's within Makkah nowadays. But in the olden days, it used to be outside Makkah. The departure was planned for the 24th, but the government confiscated 23 camels. This resulted in a delay of 2 days. And I'm going through some of this information. It's quite tedious. We're going through it just to give some taste of what type of Hajj they performed in those days. Therefore, we left Jarwal 2 days later after Asr at 9 o'clock Arabian time. So when they say Arabian time, this is another thing that comes in Hazrat Sheikh's writings. So in the Hijaz in those days, the way they used to count the time would be from Maghrib to Maghrib. So Maghrib would be midnight, and then 1 hour would be an hour after Maghrib, and then they'd count it, and every Maghrib they reset the clock again. So it's a different style of counting time. The footnotes, this refers to a system of timekeeping that was widely used under different names across the world for many centuries. It remained in use in Saudi Arabia until late 1960s. According to the system, every day at sunset, people would adjust their watches and clocks to 0 hour, 12 midnight. They would then follow their clocks to run normally for almost 24 hours until sunset, when the clocks would be adjusted once more. And there's some clocks in the Haram, you'll see that they still follow this time. Anyway, carrying on. Then he says that therefore we left Jawwa 2 days later after Asr at 9 o'clock Arabian time. Some had left and performed Asr in Tan'im. And at 6 o'clock Arabian time we reached Wadi Fatima, which is just outside Makkah to Mukarramah, between Makkah Mukarramah and Jeddah, where there were many long orchards of date trees. These orchards were not so wide, very long. There was also a small stream of very small, sweet water which we bathed. We also had dates. Then he carries on and he mentions the entire journey, carries on. We left Usfan at 8. We accomplished the long and arduous mountain climb before Maghrib, reached Daf at 6 on Saturday night. However, on account of steep mountain climb, the camels trailed in until 9 at night. Here too, dates were in abundance. Thin bread drenched in ghee was being sold very cheap. Milk was also in abundance. Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah Alayhi mentions all of this. He departed from here, they reached a place called Qadima, and then Qadima was a big town. And then after that, they got to Rabig, which was on the coast, just ahead of Yambu, after Badr. And however, on account of the war between Najdis and Sharif Hussain, the city had been deserted and buildings had fallen over. There was also a market there where food, drink, etc. could be purchased. Some traders offered a postal service. They would arrange for pilgrims' letters to be delivered to Yambu or Jeddah, etc. And then from Rabig on Tuesday evening after Asr, they headed for Mastura. And he carries on like this for a little while. Now, I won't go into all of the details. Moulana Saharanpuri's caravan left Bir Bani al-Hisan on Friday after Zohar and reached Khalas on Saturday morning, leaving again after Zohar. On Sunday morning, the caravan reached Quraysh, where several caravans had gathered, and then they moved on to Madinah to Munawwarah on Monday mid-morning. If Dhul Qa'dah had been 30 days, then the date of this would have been 8 Muharram, as the Sheikh says. And then he says, the late uncle Azizul Hassan Khandalvi, who's part of the entourage, whose camel at some stop was separate from our caravan and halt elsewhere, writes in his diary that the date of arrival Medina Tayyibah was the morning of 19th of July, etc. Anyway, Moulana Haj Sayyid Ahmad Sahib, the elder brother of Shaykhul Islam, Moulana Hussain Madhi Rahmatullah Alayhi. So Hazrat Madhi Rahmatullah Alayhi, Hazrat Moulana Hussain Ahmad Madhi had a brother who lived in Madinatul Munawwarah. I mean, his father had migrated to Madinatul Munawwarah with the entire family. Hazrat Madhi went to Malta, then he went to India, and he joined the independence movement. But his elder brother and a younger brother also, and some other family members stayed in Medina. And his name was Sayyid Ahmad Faidabadi. And he was the founder of Madrasa Shar'iyya. He was also a Khalifa of Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh. He had rented a house at the old Madrasa Shar'iyya. The word old is mentioned here in relation to the present new building, which was erected as a consequence of the changes and the development undertaken by the government. The old madrasa building was very simple and appealing structure. Its main entrance was located on the main road facing Babu Nisa. Now, you know when they say old and the new, the madrasa today is finished, is gone. I mean, there is a madrasa by Madrasa Sharia, is there somewhere in front of near Masjid Bilal. But the new madrasa that he refers to here, where Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah Alayhi passed away, today it's within the haram itself. It was demolished, it's gone. Anyway, so he says his main entrance was located on the main road facing the Babu Nisa of the haram. The small door was on the other side, opening into a narrow street. The ground floor of this house was occupied by Moulana Sayyid Ahmad. Moulana Saharanpuri took up residence on the second floor, where he also wrote his book, his commentary of Abu Dawud, Bazul Majhud. And the third floor was occupied by the women of Moulana Sayyid Ahmad's household. Adjacent to this, toward the Babu Nisa, was the residence of the women folk from Hazrat Saharanpuri's group. So anyway, then he goes on to the detail of Hazrat Saharanpuri and his life in Madinah to Munawwarah. This is his final few years, how he spent his time, what he used to do. The book that he wrote, or the commentary of Abu Dawud. Inshallah, we'll carry on with that next week. Moving on to the kitab itself. So the hikam itself, at the beginning we did Kitab al-Tawbah, the book of repentance. Most of the tasawwuf books talk about repentance. Repentance is very important. The second thing that we mentioned thereafter was sincerity and the importance of, after first of all, the first chapter was regarding knowledge. The second chapter was regarding Tawbah. The third chapter, which is a very long chapter, we talked about sincerity and ikhlas. And now the fourth chapter, which we're going to begin today, is about prayer. What should our prayer be like? And that's why we say that, sometimes people say tasawwuf, it's all about the dhikr, but it's about the situation of the heart. And when it comes to the amal, how do we bring life into our amal? Ibn Ataullah Iskandari Rahmatullah Alayhi mentions, he says, Namaz hakiki dilon ko aghyar ke mel kuchel se paak karne wali और पोशीदा असरार का दरवाज़ा खोलने वाली है। नमाज सरगोशी का महल और मोहब्बत इखलास की जगह है। इसमें कुलूब के मैदान असरारों के लिए फ़राख होते हैं और उसमें अनवार के सितारे चमकते हैं। दिस इज़ नमाज हकीकी, द ट्रू नमाज। दिलों को अग्यार के मेल कुचल से पाक करने वाली। It purifies the heart from anything aside from Allah Almighty. The impurities from anything aside from Allah Almighty, it removes and purifies the heart. पोशीदा असरार का दरवाज़ा खोलने वाली है. It opens, the namaz that's done in the true sense, it opens the door for those hidden secrets to open up. Namaz sargoshi ka mahal. Namaz is a time for a person to be intimate and speak to Allah Almighty and have some connection to Allah Almighty. Mahabbat e ikhlas ki jagah is a place of love for Allah Almighty, ikhlas, sincerity. Isme kulub ke maidan asraron ke liye faragh hote hai. In it, the vast areas of the heart, it opens up and it becomes wide in order to attain some sort of asrar, the secrets, some sort of connection to Allah Almighty. Usme anwar ke sitare chamakte hai, and within it, when you pray perform namaz in the true sense, then the stars of light begin to shine. What does this mean? Faida. Jo log Allah ke khas bande hai. Maulana Abdullah Gangohi Rahmatullah commenting on this says that those people who are special slaves of Allah Almighty, unke qulub har waqt Allah ki yaad mein rehte hai, their hearts remain remembering Allah Almighty at all times. Lekin makhluk se milne julne, but however at the same time, because they meet the creation and they were living in the world, tabhi zarurat ke anjam dene mein, and then they fulfilling the necessities, the needs of the dunya itself, the things that they need to do, business, working, etc. एक नौ की गफलत और गैरुल्लाह के साथ कल्ब को एक किस्म का इलाका होकर कदूरत होती है. Now because of this, there are type of ghaflat, yani mindlessness, not thinking of Allah Almighty, गैरुल्लाह के साथ कल्ब को, and then because he's associating with those things aside from Allah Almighty, then some sort of impurity enters the heart because of this. लेकिन जब नमाज में मशगूल होते हैं, but when a person he turns towards Allah Almighty and he performs prayer, तो उनकी नमाज अग्यार के मेल कुचल से उनके कुलूब को पाक कर देती है. Then the prayer itself done properly, what happens? It removes the impurity of anything aside from Allah Almighty from the heart. खालिस हुजूरी उनके मर्तबा के मुआफ़िक मुयस्सर हो जाती है. He is able to acquire a level of being completely in the presence of Allah Almighty. और जब अग्यार के पर्दे दिल से उठ गए, and when the veils of anything aside from Allah Almighty were to be removed from him, और मवाने मुर्तफ़े हो गए, and those things are between him and Allah Almighty are removed, तो पोशीदा असरार के दरवाजे, then hidden secrets, the doors for these hidden secrets open up. Allah की मारिफत के राज उनके दिलों में पर नमाज में खुलते हैं, and the मारिफत of Allah Almighty and the secrets of this opens up to him in his prayer. और उनकी नमाज अपने रब से सरगोशी करने का महल बनती है, and the namaz becomes a time, the prayer becomes a time for him to be intimate and have some connection to Allah Almighty. इखलास और मोहब्बत से पुर होती है. His namaz becomes full of sincerity and love. कि गैरुल्लाह की मुतलक गुंजाइश नहीं रहती, that he has no ability, no opportunity of having any sort of connection to anything aside from Allah Almighty. दिलों के मैदान असरार इलाही के लिए फराख हो जाते हैं. The heart opens up in order to acquire that connection and the secrets of Allah Almighty. और खुल जाते, they open up. कोई तंगी और इंकिबाज और घबराहट उनमें नहीं. There's no restriction, there's no striction, there's no narrowness inside the heart. और इन हजरात की नमाज में अनवार सितारों की तरह चमकते हैं. And in these people, when they perform their prayer, then the lights shine like stars. जिनका दिल वो दिलों की आंख से मुशार करें, which they witness from the eyes of the heart, the eyes of the heart. मकसूद ये है कि हर मोमिन को चाहे. And then he says, this is the purpose, and this is why everyone should, this is the crux of what he's saying. The purpose is कि हर मोमिन को चाहे, every believer should try कि ऐसी ही नमाज पढ़ने की कोशिश करे, that he should perform a prayer that's completely dedicated to Allah Almighty, यानी completely connected to Allah Almighty. जब हक जल्ला व अला ने इबादत से तेरी मलालत व गिरानी मालूम की, तो रंग बरंग की इबादतें तेरे लिए मुकर्रर फरमाई. The next one, he mentions that Allah Almighty has created worship for you, and at the same time that when a person worships, then it so happens that if he worships in the same way, you perform salah, or you just read Quran all day, or you just do one type of ibadat, what happens is a person becomes slightly what's the word, girani, and he finds it weary, he finds it difficult to carry on doing the same thing. If you have to eat biryani every day, you'll get tired. So there's different, we spin the dastakhan round a bit. We have a bit of a mix of this and that. Likewise, when it comes to ibadat, if you just had one type of ibadat throughout your life, they become quite difficult. So there's different types. So rang barang ki ibadat tere liye mukarraf. Allah Almighty has created different types of worship. और जब इबादत पर तेरे हिर्स देखिए, when he saw that you've got an eagerness to worship, तो तुझको से मना फरमा दिया, then he stops you from performing certain prayers as well. makruh time, etc. इसलिए कि तेरा कष्ट कामिल नमाज अदा करने का न हो. And why? Because it might be the case that if you were just doing one thing, then you wouldn't be performing prayer in a complete way. महज सूरत नमाज क्यों कर न अदा करने का न हो न महज सूरत नमाज. Why? Because you wouldn't be performing prayer in the proper way. You would just be performing prayer like a routine, like a ritual, but without actual life inside. क्योंकि हर एक नमाज पढ़ने वाला कामिल नमाज अदा करने वाला नहीं होता. Why? Because the person that performs prayer, he doesn't always perform prayer in the perfect way, the कामिल नमाज. Explanation. जानना चाहिए, person should know कि इंसान ज़ईफ़ुल बुनियान, the person is weak. एक ही काम को देर तक करने से उसको उकता जाता है. When a person carries out one particular action, he carries on doing it, he becomes weary. और वो काम गिरा मालूम होने लगता है, and it becomes difficult for him to perform that action. मुख्तलिफ कामों में दिल बहला रहता है. When he does different things, a variety of things, then his heart becomes attached to it. उनका अंजाम को पहुंचा देता है. It makes him reach the end. और नीज़ ये भी समझना चाहिए कि हक़ ताला की बंदगी में हर वक्त लगा रहना बंदा का फ़र्ज़ है. At the same time, each person should also realize that it's फ़र्ज़ upon a person to be involved in some sort of worship of Allah Almighty at all times. बस जब ये हालत इस इंसान की तहरी, when the person's condition is this, it's wajib for him to perform some sort of ibadat of Allah Almighty at all times. But at the same time, his nature is such that he becomes weary from performing the same action over and over and again. So what happens then? तो अल्लाह ने रंग बरंग की इबादत मुकर्रर, Allah has created different types of worship, acts of worship for him. एक इबादत को दायमन नहीं रखा. He's not kept one type of worship compulsory at all times, कि उससे बंदा उकता ना जाए, so that the person doesn't become weary. मसलन अगर यह हुक्म होता, if the command was कि हर वक्त नमाज ही पढ़ो, that pray नमाज at all times, तो यकीनन बंदे उससे घबरा जाते. Then the person will become worried by this, और बंदा का दिल लगा रहता है. But now his heart remains attached to worship. Why? Because namaz, there's tilawat Quran, he's got recitation of Quran. There's also hajj, there's zakat, there's qurbani, there's fasting, there's dhikr, etc. etc. No ki ibadat mukarrar farma di. Allah Almighty has created different types of acts of worship. Ke bando ka dil na uktawe, that he doesn't become weary. Ke har ibadat ki shan aur zawq juda gana hai. Why? Because each action has a different flavor and taste to it. बस औकात भी तमाम इबादत में मशगूल रहे. So by doing all these different variety of acts of worship, he's able to fulfill his 24-hour life with different types of worship and being worshipped all the times. गिरानी भी कुछ नहीं, and at the same time he doesn't become weary, वरना उकता कर छोड़ देते. Otherwise he would become fed up and he'd leave it completely. दूसरी खासियत इंसान के अंदर उकताने के मुकाबले में हिर्स और शौक़ है. At the same time, the other thing that's inside the insan is that he has a tendency to become extremely eager. कि जब यह सिफत हद से ज़्यादा बढ़ती है, and when he becomes extremely eager, तब भी काम बिगड़ जाता है. Then also the situation becomes corrupt or ruined. मसलन कहीं जाने का शौक़ हद से ज़्यादा बढ़ गया. He wants to go somewhere and he is really eager to go there. तो बहुत से ज़रूरी काम वहाँ जाने के मुतालिक ख़राब हो जाएंगे. But he's so eager that if he goes there or he does go there, there's so many necessary things that he needed to sort out, he left. So it's like a little child wanted to go to Blackpool, but then everything that needs to be done at home, they forget. They don't sleep on time. The next day, they become tired. And then they fall ill. And then they don't go to school on the next day. बस जब शिद्दत से हिर्स नमाज की होगी. So he says that if the condition was such that person had great eagerness to perform salah, तो नमाज को उसके हुकूक के साथ अदा करना मुश्किल होगा. Then it becomes extremely difficult for him to perform his prayer in a way that he fulfills all the rights of the prayer. मसलन शिद्दत शौक़ और टूट कर पढ़ने में वुज़ू ही ना करेगा. Why? Because he might be so eager, he might not even do his wudu properly, or he doesn't do wudu at all. या कुरान जल्दी जल्दी पढ़ेगा, or he might recite the Quran so quickly, उसमें तदब्बुर खुशू ना हो. There's no tadabbur, and he's not contemplating it. Khushu, there's no humility in reciting the Quran, but he's just spinning it quickly, fast. जब यह सिफत इंसान में हुई, when a person has this quality or this attribute inside them, तो अल्लाह ताला ने नमाज और दीगर इबादत को बाज़ औक़ात में मना फरमाया है. Allah Almighty, because of this, has at times certain acts of worship, prayer, some other acts of worship, at times he's forbidden this, ताकि वो हिर्स और इज्जत और किसी काम पर टूट कर पढ़ने की खसलत दी जाए. So then Why? So that he doesn't perform this prayer in a deficient way. He doesn't perform these acts of worship in a way that's not complete. Khas waqton mein namaz muqarrar farmaye. At specific times, Allah Almighty has made namaz wajib upon the person. Taaki banda ka qasd ye ho, so that the person's situation is such कि नमाज कामिल दर्जे की अदा हो, that he performs his prayer in the most perfect way. जल्दी और हिर्स में ये न हो. He doesn't perform his prayer hastily and in eagerness. के नमाज की सूरत बना ले, so that it looks like as if he's performing prayer externally. He's done the wudu, he's coming to the masjid, he's going up and down, he's touching the ground, he's doing the sajda, he's doing the prostration. It looks like he's performing the namaz. But the namaz, the jaan of the namaz isn't there. And it's about bringing the jaan of the namaz, the life of the namaz into the prayer. इसलिए कि नमाज की सूरत में और कामिल नमाज में बड़ा फ़र्क है. He then says, this, the reason behind this is that when it comes to the external actions of the prayer, and then that's one thing, and that's separate to the actual perfect prayer. That when a person performs his prayer, he's standing in front of Allah Almighty and he's connecting to Allah Almighty. The namaz is perfect. He's thinking, his actions are all correct, but at the same time, from heart and mind, he's connected to Allah Almighty. Har namaz padhne wala kamil darja ki namaz ada karne wala nahi hota. Then he says that everyone that performs prayer, they are not always those people who are performing prayer in the most perfect way. Then after that, he carries on for a few more pages. Inshallah, we'll carry on next week when he explains how to perform the prayer in a way that's kamil and a person is able to connect to Allah Almighty and bring some life into one's prayer. And inshallah, Allah give us all tawfiq to perform our namaz in the correct way. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallah wa bihamdihi, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. I think azan is at 20 past. So only a few minutes zikr, and then after that we finish inshallah.